If you have questions, feel free to put them in the chat. All right, so we stopped at scope management. We did that little exercise, and we'll continue again throughout the day to build on our project plan until we get it accomplished to have that team fair, a real thing. So the next thing we're going to look at, the next project management knowledge area, is called integration management. It's bringing all the different pieces of the project together. Bringing your technology, your back end operations, your support, your schedule, your costs, pretty much everything. And it involves a holistic view of basically the whole project. So you will see that the charter is listed as part one process under the initiating process group, as you can see at the top left here in this matrix. Develop project charter, because the charter kind of encompasses the whole project, talks about risk, it talks about scope, it talks about timelines, budget, that kind of stuff. Of course, at a high level. Also the project management plan. Project management plans could be big documents that comprise of other plans included in it, or it could be that spreadsheet that you guys were working on. All of those tabs together and additional tabs that you can be creating is kind of your plan. So it's like a shell or an umbrella for other plans. Then we also look at, under the executing process group, there's a couple of processes. There's directing and managing the project work. So giving the team direction, looking at their work, what they're doing, tracking their progress, the status of problems and issues, things like that. So this is going to be under executing. And part of that is also monitoring. So checking the status of these issues. Have they been closed? How long have they been open? That type of stuff. So these are the processes, and we'll take a deeper look into each one of them under the integration management area. All right, so integration management obviously spans across different groups. In the initiation group, we talked about the charter definition. PMI used to have something called preliminary scope statement. It's kind of like a draft of your scope statement. It's not final because you're still in the brainstorming phase, the initiation. They kind of got rid of that in their latest standard. But again, projects in general are progressive, meaning they have an evolution from a very high level concept with a lot of ambiguity, a lot of unknowns, to more structured, more contained, more clear scope, to more details. And as that happens, you have better accuracy of what you're trying to build. So, it definitely is an evolving process. You come up with concept development for the overall, again, solution, the overall project. You come up with needs analysis, what we've talked about in scope, right? Again, you do that at a holistic picture for the whole project, not necessarily just, specific areas. And then from a planning perspective, like we mentioned, the big thing is the project management plan, just some shell that collects everything that you're planning. When it comes to executing, like we mentioned, direct and manage your team. And as you're doing that, you're monitoring work. If you remember the slide from yesterday, we said the triple constraint triangle, or the three key things that a project manager should be focused on, is budget, schedule, and deliverables, or the quality of the work, the expectations that you're giving your client. So basically, it's all about work. How much work have we provided? What's the value of that work? Literally the monetary value of what's been produced to date. And then from an integration perspective, we close the project as a whole. You don't close parts of the project, you close the whole thing. We talked about turnover and all that stuff. So it's kind of part of integration.
Excuse me.
Yes?
So one of the things I've been wondering about is, like, you mentioned, like, turnover. What exactly, which is basically, turning over the project after it's done to, like, a different organization, like your client. You know, I was wondering, like, if it's like a small project that we start ourselves, you know, yeah, we can have people help us, like vendors or everything. We have to worry about, like, and we do have to keep in mind about our, like, stakeholders, the people that are that are going to be affected by this project, but like this is supposed to be like a bigger project that involves like other organizations like Ilya and a different other charity organization. Is that once the project is done, then we have like the that's when the turnover starts.
Yeah, the turnover exactly starts when you basically close your project and give your client, whether it's an internal client or an external one, deliverables so that they can start using it.
Yeah, so I mean, well, that's when the project, that's if the project's big and is working with like other people, other organizations,
Yeah, I
right?
mean, even with small projects, there could be a turnover. It might not be as evolved or involved. It could be short, maybe take 15 minutes, but there is that step. Someone is turning over something to another group of people to take care of it from that point on.
Could you let Ahmed in?
I think he's in. I see him there. Okay, let's move on so we don't lose time, and then we can ask those questions during our activity session. So let's touch on dependencies. And if you guys have questions, feel free to put them in the chat. This way we can address them as we go through. So dependencies are usually cross-functional. They usually cross different domains within the project. So for example, if we are talking about the youth crisis line again, you can have a dependency, what type of telecommunication service to bring in to your call center based on the expertise level of your counselors. If they are tech savvy, you might be able to bring a more advanced technology solution. If they're not very technical people, you might need a different solution, and there is a dependency there, right? There's some relationship. There could be a dependency on the number of people you have. So depending on how many counselors you have, you would decide how many shifts or how long these shifts would be, and so on. So it is very important to understand dependencies on a project. And sometimes some dependencies are hidden. You do require a subject matter expert, a SME. We call them SMEs, subject matter experts, in that particular area, right? So if it has to do with call handling, you might want to talk to a subject matter expert who knows about call centers. They might know nothing about crisis stabilization. They might not know anything about workflows for a crisis center, but they know very well how to handle phone calls. So that could be a subject matter expert for that particular piece of the call center. Or you could have a subject matter expert in the area of data capturing. So a database administrator, someone who understands databases very well, understands how to create reports, things like that, but they have no idea about crisis stabilization. They have no idea about call centers, but they can help you understand the dependencies that a database has on other things in general. So you would need a number of subject matter experts in different domains so that you can piggyback on their knowledge to identify some dependencies that exist on your project. And those dependencies will have an impact on scope. I remember I was working on a project once for Corning Glass. Corning, they're the world leader in specialty glass. They do the glass for all the smartphones, for the space shuttles, all these types of specialty glass. And one of the things they were trying to do was upgrade their supply chain infrastructure. All the IT systems that puts in their orders, that goes to their factories across the globe with their sales system and whatnot. And in order for them to upgrade the software that does that, they had to upgrade the operating system. So the software depended on the operating system. You couldn't go to a higher version of the software unless you upgrade the operating system itself. And the operating system itself would not run properly unless the firmware of the hardware was upgraded. And the firmware of the hardware would not be upgraded unless the data center itself, met certain specs and things like that. And the infrastructure, the hardware itself was supported by 3 different vendors, Dell and HP and someone else. And you had to make sure that all the racks were upgraded, at the same time and so forth. So that's an example of dependencies. You might be trying to do something completely different, but you have a dependency that spans a completely different area of the organization with some other external factors, and that would definitely impact the scope of your project. So if you take the example of the youth crisis line, you might want to bring in, let's say, 24/7 coverage. So you say, all right, we're going to have a counselor located overseas, not in this country. But there could be a dependency on privacy acts or certain ways of storing data because it's outside of the country and that person is not, under the regulations of the United States, for example. So these are dependencies that could pop up and cause a little bit of, scope change and so forth. Similar to dependencies, it would help you define your constraints. So you might be constrained to a certain thing if that dependency cannot be changed. There are cases where you just can't change those dependencies. They're out of your control, and you're going to have to work with the constraints that you have. Right, so those are important things to think about, and you might want in your project workbook to create a separate tab, just call it dependencies, or you could put it on your scope sheet to add, a section for dependencies. Typically, dependencies come in different types. We kind of alluded to this right now. So you have mandatory things, like hard logic. You can't put a roof on top of a structure without walls to carry it, for example. So that's rules of physics, the rules of life. There's our discretionary dependencies. Like, for example, you might decide to operate your center from 5 to 7, or you can change it from 5 to 8 and have people work an extra overtime hour. Or it could be external dependencies, other organizations that control certain things, and you're dependent on what they can or cannot do, or other parts of projects that you just don't control. All right, a little quick thing on causation maps. Causation maps is a great business tool. It's used in business analysis and analytics and different types of decision making to understand how things correlate and relate to each other, cause and effect, basically. So, for example, the chart on the left shows two events, a birth rate, the rate of people being born, and the population size. And it is a reinforced loop, meaning the more people are born, the bigger the population becomes, and the more the population becomes, the more people have children, and it keeps reinforcing itself, right? So you see it says an S at the top or the end of each of those two arrows because it's a reinforcing loop. The way the universe has been created, you cannot have loops that are reinforcing forever. That would cause imbalance and chaos. At some point, the system would just go out of control and collapse. So what typically happens in real life is there is a balancing loop. So for example, you would see that there's something called death that balances birth. It doesn't mean that it has to be one-to-one, but it balances out to some degree in some form or fashion. So you have, as the population increases, also the death rate increases. And as that happens, the population decreases. So there is an opposite causation here and an effect. The more the people are existing, the more the death rate, but the more the death rate, the less the population would be. So this is helpful in brainstorming, in your ideation sessions, in that initiation process group at the beginning of each stage. You can use things like that. So the more calls we get in the crisis center, what happens? Well, the more our counselors would be overloaded, the more our database would grow. But then what happens? What if we continuously get people? We're just going to grow forever? No, when your counselors get saturated, they're going to be stressed out and they will stop taking calls. So that's going to balance things out unless you bring in more counselors. So it helps in understanding dependencies. It helps understanding things that are a little bit hidden, and it could be very complex. A lot of businesses use this technique in figuring out how things work. Here's an example for an IT data center. We're not going to go through this, but as you can see, you have a variable cost for the operating of your data center. You have a loop, we call it the money loop. So investments, productivity leads to revenue. Revenue leads to cash flow. The more cash I have, the more funds I can invest more. I have a bigger budget, which means more expenses, which means less cash flow. So you see there's some balancing here going on, and it could even evolve bigger than this. Here's another example of a work breakdown structure. We're talking about this under integration because it spans the entire solution, entire project. And like I mentioned in the previous discussion, there are two ways to present your WBS. So if we take this example here, let's say this is a company that's doing refrigerators like a Kenmore or a Westinghouse, one of those brands. You can present your project in two different ways. You can take each unit of the fridge. You can say the auto defrost, the cooling system, the system control, lights, whatever, and list every component underneath it. And then every component needs to be designed, worked on, and it has a bunch of work items related to it. Or you can look at it from a process perspective. What does it take to make a fridge? Well, I need to identify the needs of the market. So I'm going to talk about needs analysis. I need to refine the concept of the fridge. You know, how big is it going to look like, its color, you know, that type of thing. Then the design, then the development, prototyping it, testing it, integrating all these components, and then producing it. At the end of the day, it's still a fridge. Whether you go this approach, that approach, it doesn't matter. The top one is called the product kind of, you know, oriented. It's more based on the components of the product. The second one, the one at the bottom, is more process oriented. You're focusing on the process of making that fridge. At the end of the day, they're both exactly the same fridge. It's just two different ways of presenting your WBS and, you know, getting your team to understand every little thing that needs to happen on the project. All right, I don't see questions in the chat. So again, if you have a question, please feel free to put it in the chat. Otherwise, we're going to go ahead and continue our project for the job team fair. So we'll go back into our groups and have you guys continue that activity we started. You worked on scope. Next thing you want to work on now is integration. You want to clean up the scope piece a little bit, add more details to your goals, your objectives. You can start thinking of your vision quite a bit now that you have objectives and things like that. From an integration perspective, you can start working on your WBS. Also, your charter is another thing that you can work on for the integration. So for this activity, focus on the charter, focus on the WBS. WBS is one of the most important pieces of artifacts on your project because it kind of brings everything together. So you want to make sure you practice that really well. It's part of scope per PMI's standard, but you know, you can also argue that's integration because it really encompasses the entire project. So I'll pause here if there are any questions before we break back into our groups.
Okay, so wait, crud. So basically, work breakdown section, whatever it is. So the WBS, yes, it's obviously, you know, breaking down the work, whether it's for like employees, so like say, oh yeah, this group of people deals with like charity, this group of people involved is going to deal with like, you know, buying like tech for the data center or whatever, or this group of people is going to deal with like, you know, creating advertisements, they're going to deal with like the marketing.
Yeah,
or
it basically lists the entire work that needs to happen on the project.
yeah, I think it saw somewhere on this that it had something to do with like work, like WBS on like the product and the project itself.
Yeah, so you have two ways of presenting the work, either by the process, how you do the work, or by the final result of the work. Either way is fine.
So like if we tried doing this by like the product, you know, the deliverable, the end result, that being, you know, the teen fair actually working out well, you know.
So it would be based on how do you put the fair together, or the final way the fair is going to look like. So you can, if you're going by process, what do I need to do to make the fair happen? So calling vendors, securing a venue, getting software, those kinds of things. Or you can do it from a product perspective. What is the fair going to look like? And that's where you want to think of the vision quite a bit. Like there'll be booths, there'll be vendors, there'll be youth, that type of thing. So why don't you guys think about that together on your groups? I'll go ahead and open the rooms and, discuss your questions together so we don't lose time. We'll take about 15 minutes for this and then we'll jump right into schedule management.
Oh, right. Also about the objectives. Objectives are supposed to be like how we do it.
Say that again.
Objectives are supposed to be like how we do it, because like on the workbook, the project plan workbook,
Mhm. No, the objectives is not how you do it. The objectives is why are you doing it? Why are you doing the project?
Oh, all right. And yeah, obviously, I think we already know what scope is, what we're trying to do, and it needs to be like specific, manageable, attainable, have like a certain time frame, all that, because like my group is trying to like do this, like do like the teen job fair specifically that's going to like start at like a certain time and end at a certain time. I thought it was, I mean, it can usually just be like just a short thing, like a few sentences, right?
Yeah, so when the job fair starts and ends, those are product features, right? Those are the specs of the job fair. They kind of come as part of your requirements. So your requirements 5.2 here that we talked about in scope, those usually become your features of your product. In the case of a job fair, the features would be the number of people that can come in, the hours of operation, number of vendors, the type of discussions they're having, the type of presentations, those types of things. Making sense?
Yeah. So basically, the project, like the scope, basically kind of just involves like the requirements, and then we have to like do the WBS, all that. Okay.
All right. I gotta go jump in one of those rooms, see what they're doing. So I will put you back in your group. I think you were in room 1, so I will add you to that group.
So right now we're just making a WBS for what we did, right?
Yeah, I think so.
Cool. Can somebody share their screen real quick?
Assalamualaikum.
Walaikum salam. How's it going?
I'm doing good. How about you?
Alhamdulillah. So you guys start working on your WBS?
I don't think so. I don't know.
Why not? Who's the project manager for this group?
Zafar?
Yeah. I'm the project manager. I think like the WPS is on the same spreadsheet, right?
Yeah, it's one of the tabs there.
Okay, WBS details, right?
All right. So WBS.
You guys still have the link to that thing I shared?
Yeah, I'm on it right now.
All right. Cool.
Okay, I'll be right back.
All right. So I think before addressing the WBS, let's